Elias woke to a silence that wasn't supposed to exist. No wind stirred, no distant hum, nothing alive moved outside, only the faint pulse of the streetlight, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the town itself. On his desk lay a photograph, his own smiling face. He blinked. The smile smeared, then disappeared, leaving the paper blank and cold. A bell tolled somewhere, so close it made his chest ache, yet so distant it whispered of places he could never reach. And in that moment, terror struck him with clarity. If he slept tonight, even for a second, he might vanish completely, and no one would ever remember he had existed. Elias Verna realized something was wrong with the town long before the bell rang, long before the fog crept close enough to touch his shoes, long before the photograph began to change. It started with a feeling he could not name, a quiet pressure behind his eyes, as though the world around him had shifted slightly out of alignment and was waiting for him to notice. Averloch did not announce itself. One moment, he was driving through an empty stretch of forest road, the radio dissolving into static, and the next the trees thinned abruptly, and buildings stood where there should have been nothing at all. He slowed the car instinctively, his hands tightening on the wheel, because something in him understood that this was not a place meant to be entered carelessly. The town looked ordinary at first glance, almost disappointingly so. Narrow streets stretched out beneath old lamps that glowed with a dull amber light despite the early evening hour. Shops stood open as if business had just paused for the day, their windows clean, their interiors untouched by dust. There were no people, no voices, no movement beyond the faint drifting of fog that curled lazily along the ground. Elias parked near the center square and stepped out, the door closing behind him with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. The air felt heavy, saturated with something invisible, and he became suddenly aware of his own breathing. Too loud, too present, as if the town were listening to it. He walked for several minutes, calling out once, then again, his voice swallowed almost immediately by the stillness. Every instinct told him to leave, to get back into the car and turn around. Yet, when he tried the door again, it would not open. The handle moved freely, but the lock refused to disengage, as though the car itself had decided the journey was over. It was then that he noticed the inn. It stood slightly apart from the surrounding buildings, taller, older, its wooden sign creaking softly even though the air was still. The nightward inn, the letters carved deeply, deliberately, as if meant to last longer than the town itself. Inside, warmth closed around him too quickly, like a held breath released. The lobby was empty, but a key rested on the counter, its tag marked simply with the number 3. No ledger, no bell, no sign of staff. Elias hesitated only a moment before taking it, because the alternative was returning to the streets, and something about the streets felt far worse. As he climbed the stairs, he became aware of a strange delay in his reflection. Each mirror showed the hallway clearly, but his own image lagged behind his movements, correcting itself a fraction of a second too late. By the time he reached his room, unease had settled into his chest like a slow, spreading bruise. Room 3 was small but clean. A neatly made bed, a desk by the window, and on that desk a notebook and pen, placed with deliberate precision. Beside them lay a photograph he did not remember owning. It showed a fog-filled street under old lamps, unmistakably Averloch. Yet the angle suggested it had been taken from inside the room, looking out. He lifted it, turning it over, finding nothing written on the back. When he set it down again, he told himself it was exhaustion, stress, coincidence. He told himself many things that night, most of them untrue. The bell rang at exactly 12:13 a.m. It was not loud, but it was absolute. a sound that seemed to pass through walls and bone alike, vibrating somewhere deep inside his skull. Elias sat upright in bed, his heart racing, certain that the sound had not come from outside, but from everywhere at once. He reached for his phone to check the time, only to find the screen dark and unresponsive. The room felt different now, subtly altered, as though something had stepped into it while he was not paying attention. That was when he noticed the photograph again. The street was still there, the lamps still glowed, but the figure he had seen beneath the nearest light had vanished. Elias stood so abruptly that the chair beside the bed tipped over. He stared at the photograph, his breath shallow, his thoughts scrambling for explanations that would not come. He was certain, utterly certain, that moments earlier someone had been standing there. A man with his back to the camera, tense, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. Now there was only fog. Somewhere beyond the walls the bell rang again, closer this time, and with it came the unmistakable sensation of being watched by something that no longer needed eyes. Sleep pressed against him then, not suddenly but persuasively, like a voice whispering that everything would make sense if he just closed his eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed, fighting the heaviness in his limbs, when the pen on the desk rolled by itself and fell to the floor. The sound snapped his attention back sharply, and when he looked at the notebook, his blood turned cold. Words had appeared on the first page, written in a hand that was not his, the ink still glistening. The warning was simple and final. The town erased the inattentive. Before he could process it, the pages began to flip, one after another, revealing names written with obsessive care. All of them crossed out so violently the paper had torn in places. Hundreds of names, lives reduced to ink and then struck through as if they had never mattered at all. A knock sounded at the door, 3 slow taps that seemed to echo long after the sound had stopped. Elias did not move. He could not. The handle turned anyway. The woman who entered looked like someone who had not slept properly in years. Her eyes were sharp, alert, carrying a tension that matched his own. She glanced at the notebook, at the photograph, and then at him. Relief flickered across her face, brief but genuine. She told him her name was Mara Linth, and that if he intended to survive Averloch, he needed to listen very carefully. She explained that the town did not kill people, it removed them. It waited for distraction, for fatigue, for the smallest lapse in awareness, and then it rewrote reality so cleanly that even memory struggled to hold on. The bell rang again as she spoke, and Elias felt something pull at the edges of his mind, tugging at thoughts that suddenly felt distant, unimportant. Mara told him that sleep was the town's most efficient weapon, that dreams were not dreams here but openings, and that once the town learned the shape of his thoughts, it would begin to test him. She showed him the marks she had left throughout her room, names scratched into wood, phrases written again and again, proof of presence, proof of resistance. Existence, she said, was an active act in Averloch. The first true test came before dawn. Elias noticed it when the room subtly rearranged itself, furniture shifting by inches when he looked away, reflections in the window glass moving independently of him. Voices began to whisper, not from the walls but from inside his own head, speaking in tones he recognized, reminding him of forgotten comforts, urging him to rest. Each time he felt his focus slip, something vanished, a word from the notebook, a detail from his past, the name of a street he grew up on. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but Mara's voice cut through it, grounding him, forcing him to stay present. By the second night, the town became bolder. The bell rang more frequently, its tone changing subtly, as though learning how to reach deeper. Elias watched from the window as a light across the street turned on, revealing a figure standing motionless behind the glass. When he blinked, the figure was gone, and the building itself looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. Mara told him not to look for those who vanished. The town punished curiosity as harshly as inattention. Exhaustion hollowed him out faster than fear ever could. Time lost its shape. Minutes stretched into agonizing lengths, then collapsed without warning. The bell rang unpredictably now, sometimes softly, sometimes in relentless succession, each toll stripping away a fragment of certainty. Objects shifted when he looked away. Words in the notebook rearranged themselves. Once, he caught his reflection smiling at him from the window glass, its expression lingering a moment too long after his own face had gone still. The breaking point came without ceremony. The bell rang again and again, overlapping itself, the sound crushing his thoughts into static. Memories unraveled. Faces, voices, moments from his life dissolving before he could grasp them. Letting go felt terrifyingly easy. Mara seized his hands and forced him to speak. His name. Again. And again. Each repetition dragged him back from the edge, anchoring him to something the town could not yet erase. When the bell finally stopped, the silence was worse. Elias understood then that Averloch did not want him gone yet. It wanted him aware, awake, struggling. Survival, he realized, was not victory here, it was permission. By morning, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the streets again, unchanged, patient. Mara told him the truth then, the one she had avoided. No one left Averloch unchanged, and most did not leave at all. The town marked those who resisted, and it waited. Elias stood at the window, watching the empty street, listening for the bell, knowing with terrible certainty that even if he escaped, some part of him would always remain here, awake, counting seconds, terrified of forgetting himself. The bell rang once more, soft and distant, and Elias flinched, because he understood now what it meant. Somewhere in Averloch, someone had finally stopped paying attention. Elias did not sleep after that. He learned quickly that wakefulness in Averloch was not the same as alertness elsewhere. The town demanded a sharper form of attention, one that cut through habit and comfort alike. He spoke his name aloud at regular intervals, not as reassurance but as resistance, anchoring himself to the sound of it. He wrote constantly, filling pages with memories, observations, fragments of thought, anything that proved continuity. Mara watched him with approval, tempered by something darker, a knowledge earned through losses she never fully described. The town changed its tactics. Elias noticed food appearing, warm, familiar, tasting exactly like meals he remembered from childhood. The bed softened impossibly beneath him, promising rest without consequence. The whispers shifted, no longer urging surrender but offering understanding, sympathy, the comforting lie that vigilance could relax just this once. It was worse than fear. Fighting exhaustion demanded constant effort, and effort slowly eroded resolve. Averloch was patient. It did not rush consumption. It waited for comfort to become habit, for awareness to dull under the weight of relief. Mara warned him, temptation was the final kindness before erasure. On the seventh night, the town showed him the truth it had been withholding. The bell rang, not once, but in a slow, deliberate pattern, and the fog rolled back to reveal the square filled with people. They stood motionless beneath the lamps, faces blank, eyes open and unfocused. Elias recognized some of them from the notebook, names he had seen crossed out, people who should not exist. Mara's grip tightened on his arm as she told him not to speak to them, not to acknowledge them in any way. These were not survivors. They were remnants, echoes allowed to persist, for a purpose Elias did not yet understand. One of the figures turned its head toward him. Its mouth opened, and in his own voice it spoke his name. The sound nearly broke him. He felt memory slipping, not violently this time, but gently, like something being unthreaded with care. Mara forced him to look away, her voice sharp, grounding, reminding him that recognition was the final step before removal. When the figures vanished and the fog returned, Elias was shaking, aware that the town had learned how to reach him more precisely than ever before. Mara told him then what Averloch truly was. Not a place that trapped people by chance, but a mechanism that fed on attention, on consciousness itself. It existed where awareness thinned, where people moved through life on habit alone. Most never noticed the moment they were taken, because noticing had already stopped mattering to them. Those who resisted prolonged the process, but resistance came at a cost. The town remembered those who fought it. The realization settled heavily in Elias's chest. Escape, if it was possible at all, would not be clean. Averloch would follow him in subtler ways, in moments of distraction, in the quiet spaces between thoughts. The bell would never truly fade. The final test came without warning. Elias was writing when the words on the page began to rearrange themselves into sentences he had not chosen, memories he had not lived. The room darkened, the walls pulling inward, and the sound of the bell rose again, louder than it had ever been. Mara shouted for him to focus, but her voice fractured, splitting into echoes that contradicted each other. The town was no longer testing his endurance. It was a tempting replacement. Elias felt himself thinning, awareness stretching toward dissolution. In that moment, he understood vigilance alone was not enough. Resistance born of fear only fed the town. So he did the one thing Averloch had not prepared for. He let go of fear, not surrender, acceptance. He acknowledged the town's presence without yielding to it, holding his attention steady not on survival, but on meaning, on choice, on being. He spoke his name one final time, not as a defense, but as a declaration. The pressure eased, the bell faltered, the room seemed to breathe out. Elias left Averloch at dawn. The road offered no resistance. The forest closed behind him without sound, without memory, as if the town had never existed at all. No fog followed, no boundary marked escape. Reality resumed with disturbing ease. That was the first lie. Life returned in patterns, days, conversations, obligations, smooth enough to pass without notice. Elias stayed vigilant at first. He wrote, he repeated his name, he measured time obsessively. Awareness had become habit, and habit felt like safety. Weeks passed. Then one evening, Elias realized he could not remember when he had last written his name. The notebook lay open on the desk. Every page was filled, neat, deliberate handwriting, but the words no longer felt like his own. He traced a line with his finger, searching for memory, for effort, for resistance. There was nothing. At 12:13 a.m., the clock ticked forward. Elias waited for the bell. It did not ring. The silence did not press, it did not threaten, it simply was. Complete, effortless, final. And in that stillness, Elias understood the truth Averloch had never needed to explain. The town did not feed on sleep. It did not feed on distraction. It fed on the belief that attention could save you. Awareness had never been escape, only delay. Once vigilance became automatic, once resistance required no effort, it no longer mattered. Meaning faded. Choice thinned. The town did not erase him, it finished with him. Elias stood, moved through his home, touched familiar objects that felt perfectly ordinary. The world continued, uninterrupted. Nothing was wrong. That was how it worked. Elias went to bed. Somewhere, not as a place, not as a sound, Averloch did not ring its bell. It no longer needed to.